I'm going to talk today about the work that the Highways Agency has done in recent times to address flooding on the network and the processes that we've implemented to help improve efficiencies and resilience in our network, but through our maintenance program and prioritising where we put our resources. So I'll talk a little bit about the background and some of the drivers, the Pitt review in particular, and of course more recently the Floods and Water Management Act. I'll go through how we have introduced practices of recording and reporting on flooding and the processes too that we use to prioritise those places on our network that need highest priority attention and management of the risks around that. I'm sure most of you are probably aware what the Highways Agency's key responsibilities are, but we are responsible for looking after the strategic road network. That's 4,000 miles or close to of motorway in England. It carries a third of all traffic and two-thirds of all freight. It carries roads. It has roads with traffic flows ranging up to as many as 200,000 vehicles per day, and is managed through 7 regions and a number of managing agent contractors and DBFO or design, build, finance and operating service providers. This looks at times during the 2007 floods and the extreme weather events that we saw last year that our network sometimes resembles a canal network rather than a road network. But this two very good examples of how seriously the strategic road network can be affected by flooding and the implications it can have on our resilience. And in both these cases we had closures of the motorway network, and that brings with it its own implications, not only for road user safety but also the economic performance of the road network. I think we roll back to 2007 and Sir Michael Pitt's review, where recommendation 45 identified specifically for the Highways Agency areas where we should focus our attention. That wasn't to say that we weren't, it was just that already considering some of these things, but it just brought sharper focus into some of these areas. And of course the one I've highlighted there in red was the further consider the vulnerability of motorways and trunk roads to flooding. So back then that I started working much closer with our network resilience teams. Obviously they were much more mobilised at that time for dealing with the other activities identified here under recommendation 45. But I then went away and started looking at how we recorded, managed, addressed flooding on the network. Of course, there are a number of risks that we ourselves have to consider. You know, it's not just external forces saying, you know, we'd like you to manage flooding on the network better. I mean, of course, we have our own risk management procedures. Of course, flooding on our network not only leads to asset deterioration and failure of assets, other assets on the highway network. There are obviously the risks surrounding safety of road users in the events of flooding on the network, third-party costs when third parties are flooded from waters coming off of our network perhaps. And of course the key one here in terms of dealing with economy and growth is congestion and journey time reliability, which is a key focus of the Highways Agency's corporate performance. And of course ineffective use of resources. We have an annual maintenance program, same as everyone else, and we want to make sure that we're putting our money in the best places to get the best resilience and performance out of our network. And so these were all key considerations. When I went away and looked at the flooding of the network, we did a number of things. We engaged, we worked in partnership with the Environment Agency to look at surface water flooding maps, fluvial flooding maps, looked at historic data sets of, from our service providers as to where flooding was occurring on the network, and quickly came to a position on the probability of flooding on certain parts of the network. And we thought broadly that 10% of our network was vulnerable to flooding. we found that in a typical year, last year, for example, wasn't a typical year, but in a typical year, we had about 1,800 carriageway flooding incidents on the network. And from the data that we were collecting, found that about 60% of those flooding incidents were asset-related, and 40% of those were due to extreme weather events. And so we were starting to unpick the problem of how flooding was occurring on the network and how we could better manage that, as well as we were looking at the statistics around accidents on the network that were occurring during surface water flooding incidents. In 2010, I issued 2 instructions to the business, area management memorandum they're called, and these were specifically targeted at introducing new procedures for managing flood risk, and I'll talk you through the flooding hotspots one in a little bit more detail. Another one, the priority drainage assets, was a little bit more related to water quality issues, but included an aspect of culverts on our network where we felt there was a risk of flooding because they were not thought to be of adequate capacity. And these area management memo introduced new management measures and potential options for delivering solutions on the ground, and importantly the recording of flooding events in our assets management system, the Highways Agency's Drainage Data Management System, which is now a mandatory procedure to record these flooding incidents. I'll just stop on the Highways Agency Drainage Data Management System there because Will mentioned it earlier. We've been working very hard to populate this. Our asset management system is now about 80% populated in terms of inventory. There's an ongoing process of validating the data that's on the system, and of course we're working hard now to improve our knowledge of condition data on across our network. Issues such as asset deterioration curves, I think were mentioned earlier, and frequency of interventions and maintenance, obviously a key area for us to get a better understanding of and the Highways Agency's Drainage Data Management System is getting to a level of sophistication where it's helping to inform us a great deal in this particular area. Of course, another area of focus is the relationship between the drainage assets and other assets such as the pavement asset, the geotechnical assets, and to some extent the technology asset, and the cross-asset deterioration relationships that there may be there. So that's an area of ongoing work besides in the topic area, besides what I'm going to be talking about today, but will no doubt be of interest. The instructions that went out to the business, I mean, when I went out and looked at how much flooding that was going on and how it was being reported and recorded, it became very clear that there was an inconsistent way of collecting and recording flooding incident data across the network. And so one thing we needed was good, clear, consistent data reported in a similar vein across the whole network. And one of the things we introduced on the asset management system was a flood event register, where when a flooding incident is called in on the network, it's the responsibility now of a drainage liaison engineer or floods champion within our supply chain to record the details of the flooding incident, where it is on the network, when it was opened, what the cause of the flooding incident was, what the nature of that incident was, and to record some basic details around the event and how it was handled. And there is a requirement to report this within 24 hours and close out the record within 24 days. And so this allows us to go back at any point in time and query and look at the causes of flooding and help us not only understand the severity of the flooding incidents associated with the drainage on that network, on that part of the network, but look to explore the type of management or solutions that can be deployed there. Once this flood event incident record is populated, it delivers a flood severity index score, which is a measure of the impact of that flooding incident on the performance of the network. and it's calculated. It's a simple calculation across the criteria that are input on the flood record. It's, we look at the impact on traffic, whether there was a total road closure, only one lane closed, or the flooding incident caused congestion. It looks at the duration of the impact, from more than 15 minutes to obviously much longer events, hours or days. It looks at the classification of the road and the type of traffic flow on that road. And for each of those criteria, the person putting the record into the flood event register has to answer these particular facts, and it delivers a number between 0 and 1 for each criteria, depending upon the severity. For example, a 3-lane motorway fully closed would obviously be a much larger score, closer to 1 than 0, than perhaps a bit of flooding on the hard shoulder with no real impact. So the asset management system automatically generates a calculated score, which is called the Flood Severity Index score, which is, as I say, it's just a simple multiplication of the factors A, B, C, and D, and then multiplied by 10 at the end. And this gives you a simple score of between 0 and 10 of the impact of that flood incident on our network. And this is used then as a record, or you can map quite, and I'll show you some maps of how this maps out across the network. You can start quickly identifying where flooding is giving you the biggest headaches on your network, and you can look down to explore the causes of flooding and the types of solutions you might want to deliver there in terms of contingency planning or capital schemes as such. There is a final phase where you then move from just recording a flood incident to identifying a link on the network that might be defined as a flooding hotspot, and that's where you might have multiple incidents that are occurring on the same part of the network. And this is delivered, a flooding hotspot location is defined in this way through this matrix that you see on the screen, whereby it'll be the worst of either the number of flooding incidents that occur. So if we take a flood severity index score of 7 to 10 as recorded through the flood incident record, and more than 5 occurrences on any one link of our network, that would then get classified as a high-risk flooding hotspot. Similarly, if flooding to third parties was occurring repeatedly to residential properties or some other form of critical infrastructure, more than 5 occasions, that would also score as a very high critical flood hotspot on our network. And you can see from this matrix here that there are any number of combinations as to how these things can play out. But what we do end up with is something like this, where I can show you on a section of the M23. This was a screen dump from our asset management system, where you can see a section of the M23 where there are a number of multiple flooding incidents, and a link of the network there has been defined as a flooding hotspot. And the management instruction would be, if you were a service provider in that area, would be to go and confirm and validate on the ground the flood risk in that particular area. And there'd be a number of instructions. The measures there may well be, if the cause of flooding is related to our asset in any particular way, a failure of our asset, this particular area, any scheme to resolve the problem, the flooding problem on that part of the drainage network, would be prioritised through our maintenance programme and through our value management process. And I'll show you how that's done as well. But this is an example of where and how our asset management systems identify a flood hotspot. This is an output from our asset management monthly report. It's typically the table up at the top. I mean, I can't read it, but it's I can tell you it's just a record of the number of flooding incidents that have been reported in the month, the number that are still open and being investigated, and those that have been closed by area and by region. The histogram along the bottom shows you a month-on-month tally of the number of flooding incidents that are occurring. The grey data set is historic flooding data, and therefore not directly comparable with one another, but you'll see from about 2010 onwards, where the management instruction was issued to record the flooding incident data in a consistent manner, we're now getting consistent national data on flooding and the causes of flooding. And you'll see a big spike last year around about November and December, which reflects the extreme weather that we all had last year. I say we have in excess of over 2,200 flooding incidents last year. I say we typically have 1,800, so we did have a good deal more last year as a result of the extreme weather. And here we go, another output. It's useful for our asset delivery teams and service delivery teams. The map on your right-hand side shows flood events that would have occurred on the network in the last month by severity, and the map on your left-hand side shows you a 12-month view of flooding incidents by severity across the whole of the network as recorded on our system. And we can then take a cut. We take a cut at over a 12-month period of all the flooding incidents and the flood severity index scores, and we say those in the top 10 percentile or above the top 10 percentile. In this case, there's a box in the bottom corner that says what the top 10 percentile, top 20, top 50 percentile is. Well, the top 10 percentile over the last 12-month reporting period there has a score of 6.3. So if you're bringing forward a program, a scheme into our value management process, into our maintenance program, you're bidding to do work to address a known flooding hotspot, those schemes with a score above 6.3 get prioritized and get a better scoring process to push the scheme through. So obviously the schemes have to be compared for health and safety and against other business priorities, but a flooding hotspot scheme with a score above 6.3 will get greater priority than one, say, that's got a score of 4. So that's how we use the process to inform both our priorities and our maintenance program. And here we go. This is an extract from our value management guidance. You can see that our priorities. This is where you would get the highest score in the value management process. You'll be seeing if you've got a flooding hotspot with a risk status that's very high or higher, or a priority culvert, I mentioned them earlier, that had a very high status, they would score very highly in the VM process, as would a scheme that wanted to address a flood severity index location on our network that was in or above the top 10 percentile as reported through our monthly reports. And then, of course, we go on and we have the other more safety-related type aspects of the value management process that are also important. So in summary, the Highways Agency has established a method for consistently recording floods and understanding the reasons behind those floods. It's ongoing, it's under continual review. We report on the effects of individual floods, and this data is available. We are a risk management authority, as are local lead flood authorities, and we share this information with, on request with local lead flood authorities, and have been doing so over the last 12 months as they develop their preliminary flood risk assessments. There's regular reporting on all floods. It's used as a management process internally and with our supply chain. It helps us to prioritise our resources to the worst locations and make sure our priorities and corporate objectives are front and centre of the process. And it's established a method for implementing mitigation of those, of which I haven't had time to go into today, but perhaps another time.